Order, order. Welcome to the Liaison Committee on Monday the 15th of December 2025. This is the committee made up of chairs from the committee corridor in Parliament representing select committees. And we're delighted to have our session with the Prime Minister. Welcome, Prime Minister. Prime Minister, it's been a very tragic weekend. I wondered if you wanted to say anything about what's happened in Sydney.
Well, I will take that opportunity if I may, and thank you, Chair, because it was an appalling anti-Semitic terror attack that took place yesterday, and I'm sure I speak for the whole committee and the whole House, in fact the whole country, in saying our thoughts are with those affected by this attack. It has impacted not just in Australia but across the globe, and it has impacted on Jewish communities here in the United Kingdom that I know feel even more insecure today than they did before. Yesterday I was in touch with the Australian Prime Minister. I was also in touch with the CST and the Home Office and had a call with the Chief Rabbi last night, partly out of reassurance but also to talk about our plans for Hanukkah events taking place here in the United Kingdom and to make sure that every consideration is given to the security of those events. This is clearly not an isolated incident, and these incidents are chillingly focused on some of the holiest days in the Jewish calendar. And of course we have in our minds Heaton Park here in the United Kingdom in October. And I want to reassure our Jewish communities here in the United Kingdom that we will take every step that we can, use all of our powers to make sure they're safe and secure as they should be in the United Kingdom, and we'll continue our discussions after the session today.
Well, thank you very much, Prime Minister, and I know the thoughts of all of Parliament is with the victims and those affected. Today we are focusing on two issues, and I want to kick off on the issue of standards in public life, and I'll turn to Alberta Costa MP. Mr. Costa.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Prime Minister, and thank you for coming before the committee. This year, as you know, marks 30 years since the establishment of the 7 Principles of Public Life, also known as the Nolan Principles. You're familiar with these principles which underpin the ministerial code for which you're responsible, is that correct?
Yes, that's right, and we strengthen the ministerial code to directly put the Nolan Principles in the code itself.
Indeed. And in the foreword to the ministerial code, which has been updated in October of this year, I've got a copy here, you state, this code sets out the higher standards that the British people expect and that ministers must now follow. It enshrines the commitment we all make on entering the service of this nation to uphold the 7 Principles of Public Life. Your words, is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. By necessity, I will refer to very recent examples to assist you, Prime Minister, in demonstrating to this committee how you have acted in accordance with the Nolan Principles or relevant codes. Now, the first such example occurred on the 11th of December, only 4 days ago. You posted on your personal X social media account, and I quote, "Catching the bus shouldn't cost the earth. That's why we are capping bus fares at £3 and investing in new buses and stops." Your words, is that correct, Prime Minister? But X readers added context to clarify your comment. They said, important reminder, that a £2 cap was introduced by the Tories in 2023. Labour have since risen this by 50%. Prime Minister, which of the Nolan Principles do you consider to have followed in publishing your ex-post?
Well, let me just deal with the substance of that, if I may, because the £2 cap was put in place and it came to an end in December 24 with no funding for it to continue, and therefore that was the end of that scheme. What we then put in place was a new scheme for a £3 cap on bus fares, which I'm really pleased that we've been able to do, and that's what I was drawing attention to, not only in the post that went up on X, but also in the visit that I took part in last week. But the scheme that was introduced by the last government, I acknowledge that, came to an end, so that was the end of that capping scheme. What we then put in place was a further capping scheme.
Mr. Costa.
Thank you. Can I turn to ministerial statements to the House and standards expected? Under the Ministerial Code at 1.6 brackets B, it states ministers have a duty to Parliament to account and be held to account for the policies, decisions and actions of their departments and agencies. At para 9.1, It states, when Parliament is in session, the most important announcements of government policy should be made in the first instance to Parliament. And at para 9.3 it states, every effort should be made to avoid leaving significant announcements to the last day before a recess. Prime Minister, are you familiar with these three extracts from your own ministerial code?
Yes.
Thank you. Only a few days ago, on Wednesday the 10th of December, on a point of order, the Honourable Member for Harrow East, in respect of the police settlement or the local government settlement, said, and I quote, "Normally there is a debate held about both of these matters, or at least a statement given on the floor of the House, so that members are able to ask questions on the settlements. I understand it seems to be that the government's intention to put out a written ministerial statement on the last day of Parliament and not give us, that is MPs across the House, an opportunity to challenge." Mr. Speaker responded, and I quote, "I do take this matter seriously, and the House should hear that. A written ministerial statement is not the answer on matters so serious, and those on the Treasury bench should have heard that point. We should not shy away from this House. In fact, we should always come to the House first. I cannot say it more than I do, and this is the salient point. Once again, I suggest that at some point the ministerial code needs to be changed if people are not going to take it seriously, people being your ministers. Given Mr. Speaker's response to that point of order, can you tell this committee why your ministers are failing to follow the Nolan principle of accountability, which requires that they submit themselves to scrutiny for their public decisions?
Well, I do take this seriously and regularly discuss it with the Speaker, and he raises his concerns with me, and we usually try to address the concerns that he's flagged with us. And I'm always happy to do so. That's an ongoing discussion so that there is the scrutiny that is needed of the statements that have to be made.
When ministers fail to update the House and answer questions from MPs, which part of the ministerial code is being upheld?
Well, it's not just the ministerial code, it's the role of Parliament, which almost sits above the ministerial code. Mr. Speaker feels this very strongly, that we are accountable to Parliament.
Do you feel this very strongly?
Yes, I do, and that's why I regularly discuss it with the Speaker and look at. He will usually flag with me where he's got concerns, as I would expect him to, and then we go through those and try to make sure they're not.
Were you aware of this point of order raised last week?
I was, yes.
Thank you. I will now refer to a further contemporary example. I understand that this coming Thursday, the last day before the forthcoming parliamentary recess, your government, Prime Minister, intends to publish a progress report on the Grenfell inquiry by way of a written ministerial statement. Given Mr. Speaker's comments and your confirmation that you're aware of that point of order, as head of government, why are you permitting this lack of upholding standards, given the important progress report in the Grenfell inquiry and other statements that I understand will be made on Thursday? What are you going to do about that?
Well, I'll happily have a look at the proposed written ministerial statement on Thursday and discuss it with the Speaker.
Thank you. Now, paragraph 1.6 bracket C of the Ministerial Code, it quotes, "It is of paramount importance that ministers give accurate and truthful information to Parliament, correcting any inadvertent error at the earliest opportunity." Prime Minister, you are of course familiar with that paragraph of your Ministerial Code, is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Again, by reference to a recent example and to assist you in showing how you comply with the extract from the Ministerial Code, I would like to turn to last week's Prime Minister's questions, when the Leader of the Opposition asked you, how many extra teachers are there since your government took office? Now, fullfact.org, a neutral website, only a few days ago published that the PM, and I quote, claimed that the number of teachers in England is more than when the Conservatives left office. Fullfact.org added, and I quote, "This is not supported by the latest school workforce census figures, which show a fall, not a rise." Can you tell this committee which Nolan principle underpinned your answer?
Well, what I was putting before the House is the fact that we are committed to recruiting an additional 6,500 new teachers, and we've got record numbers of trainees coming into the system, and therefore that number is going up. The role, if you look at secondary schools, further education colleges, the number of teachers has gone up. That's absolutely clear. That's what our commitment was. In relation to primary schools, the number of pupils has gone down pretty dramatically in terms of the birth rate, and therefore the sheer number of teachers at primary level has gone down because less teachers are needed because the birth rate has gone down. But the focus, just for completeness, in our plan for change and in a manifesto was on 6,500 new teachers for secondary schools, specialist schools and colleges, and that's the number I was referring to.
Thank you very much. Can I now turn to the issue of written parliamentary questions and standards? Now, I know my colleague, the Honourable Member for Lancaster and Wyre, as Chair of the Procedure Committee, has issued calls for evidence in her committee's new inquiry. Now, paragraph 9.8 of your ministerial code states, and I quote, "Ministers should, where possible, provide full and timely responses to written parliamentary questions, ministerial correspondence and select committee reports." Once again, can I ask you to confirm to this committee that you're familiar with that paragraph of the Ministerial Code?
Yes.
Thank you. Can you explain why your government is failing to provide timely responses to WBQs as obligated under the standards outlined by your own Ministerial Code?
Well, we do our level best to comply, of course, and I think the Procedure Committee is looking into this, which we welcome, and we'll study carefully the findings and any recommendations that are made.
Thank you. Paragraph 1.6d of the Ministerial Code states, "Ministers," and I quote, "should be as open as possible with Parliament and the public, refusing to provide information only when disclosure would not be in the public interest." Are you satisfied that this is in compliance with the high standards you've set your government, the responses that are currently being made?
Yes, but obviously if the Procedure Committee in due course sets out its findings and any recommendations, I'd want to study them to see whether we can improve in any way.
Smith MP.
Thank you, Chair. Prime Minister, it's an indisputable fact that political staff in number 10 have been briefing against serving cabinet ministers, and you and I both sat on opposition benches whilst we had to watch the painful spectacle of political advisers briefing under Johnson and a litany of Tory Prime Ministers. Given that your record when it comes to ministers shows that you've acted very decisively and without favour in terms of applying the ministerial code, I wondered if you could say, given your responsibility for setting and upholding standards across government, if you could explain what steps you've taken to establish the facts and how you're going to ensure that number 10 political staff act in accordance with the ministerial code, the special advisors code and the Nolan principles.
Yeah, I mean, let me say to start with that briefing against cabinet ministers is completely unacceptable, whether that's from number 10 or anywhere else, and I've made that repeatedly clear to my staff, to the Cabinet, and put in place a number of procedures where there have been such allegations to give me a level of assurance that it has not happened in relation to direct briefings against ministers and members of the Cabinet. But I've been really clear and consistent on this with my staff, with my team, with the Cabinet, and put in place procedures when there are allegations to assure myself what the situation is.
Well, and on the subject of leaks, Prime Minister, last week the Treasury Select Committee had the Chancellor in front of us, and she was very cross about the information that was in the 13th of November Financial Times article by George Parker, a renowned political journalist, and she was clear that that was a leak, and she said, and I'm absolutely categorical, and I'm quoting her here, that this was not an authorised briefing. It was incredibly damaging and frustrating. That is why we have a leak inquiry. It was not briefing that was signed off by me or any of my ministers or officials. It was unacceptable. So that does, if it's not the ministers and other officials in the Treasury, there is a danger that it could have been a leak from number 10. Do you think there was a leak from number 10 Downing Street about the budget?
In relation to that incident, there's a leak inquiry going on, as I think
we know,
the Chancellor.
yes, the Chancellor's announced.
So that will go wherever the evidence takes it.
So if there was a leak from do you think there was a leak from number 10?
I've no reason to think there was a leak from number 10.
So, but if there were a leak from number
but
10,
I-
what would you do about? What would you do if there was someone was
I'll take
found?
action. I mean, and I have taken action. It's very difficult with leaks to get to the source of the information.
You would take action.
Where that has happened in the past, I have taken action, which has led to the removal of individuals.
Okay, so you would go as far as removing an individual if they were found to have leaked the budget?
Obviously I'll wait for the inquiry, but I mean, the inquiry will go wherever the evidence takes it. There's nothing to inhibit where they will go, and I'll take appropriate action if there's a finding.
Because the report in the FT was very clear. It talked about an official source, and Mr. Parker is a journalist who would have sourced that story. So that's a very big concern.
I'll get to the bottom of these leaks. They are, in any organisations, they're intolerable. I took the same action when I was head of the Crown Prosecution Service. There is a leak inquiry. It can go wherever the evidence will take it. And if it comes to a conclusion, I'll act on it.
Okay, so you're going to be ruthless with whoever's done this if they're
Well, I want to stop these leaks.
Thank you very much. Mr. Alberto.
Thank you, Chair. There is a separate code of conduct, of course, governing standards for special advisers. It's called the Code of Conduct for Special Advisers. You are, of course, familiar with this document, aren't you? Thank you. Paragraph 13 of the Code of Conduct for Special Advisers states, and I quote, "Briefing on purely party political matters must be handled by the party machine. For the purposes of this code, can you confirm that Labour Party leadership speculation is a purely party political matter?"
No, I'm not sure I can. It seems to be pretty right. In terms of the code, I know exactly where it should be dealt with, but I can say hand on heart that none of it comes from me or is encouraged by me.
Well, we'll come. But I just wanted to confirm that it's a purely party political matter in accordance with the code, Labour Party.
Well, I think the code is dealing with political briefings of a political nature, which have to come through the party, obviously, and can't come through the civil service. I think wider speculation is not necessarily a code issue.
Thank you. Well, paragraph 15 of the code, just to help you, Prime Minister, goes further. Special advisers must not take public part in political controversy. They must observe discretion and express comment with moderation, avoiding personal attacks. So you're very familiar with the code. I would like to refer to an interview that you gave to Sky News last month. On that interview, for the purposes of assisting you, Prime Minister, I'll just recap that interview. You were asked, you say that was unauthorised, referring to alleged leaks about West Streeting. You said that was unauthorised. That makes it sound you've lost complete control of your Downing Street operation. Why didn't you sack the person who was responsible for attacking one of your colleagues? You responded, "First, let me be absolutely clear that any briefing against ministers is completely unacceptable. That is not a new position for me. It's a position I've adopted ever since I became Prime Minister. I've been talking to my team today and been assured that no briefing against ministers was done by number 10. You're saying it didn't come from Downing Street." And you responded, "I've been assured," second time, "it didn't come from Downing Street." Who gave you that assurance?
Well, I had assurance from within Downing Street on
gave you that
a
assurance?
number of different levels, different people in my team.
Who gave you that assurance?
Different levels in my team. I'm not
Can you
going to...
please tell us who gave you that
Was
assurance?
it officials or for special advisors who were giving you assurance? Just give us a
Special advisors.
Thank you.
I'm not going to name members of staff,
No.
but I will add this. I didn't just take everything at face value. I looked at other bits of evidence to assure myself about what I was then saying publicly to the media.
Thank you. That interview ended as follows. "If it didn't come from Downing Street, where did it come from, and will you sack the person responsible?" You responded, "Well, I will absolutely deal with anybody responsible for briefing against ministers." And this is the salient point. "I've always said that's the standard I expect, and that's the standard I will enforce." Although you just answered a moment ago to the Chair that you have taken action and you've removed individuals, can you just confirm for this committee that in the example that I've cited, when you said that you would enforce a standard, what standard did you enforce in respect of this example?
Well, I can only take action where I've got a clear finding that somebody has breached a relevant duty or standard. When I have had that, I've acted accordingly. And that's not something new to me as Prime Minister. It's what I did as Leader of the Opposition. It's what I did as the Director of Public Prosecutions.
Thank you. My final questions, Chair. Can I turn to another issue that you rightly regularly raised when you were Leader of the Opposition, namely your frequent criticism of previous administrations' alleged cronyism and the way in which public appointments were undertaken? Now, only last month, Prime Minister, you profoundly regretted your own involvement in the appointment process for the chair of the Independent Football Regulator. In your own letter to your independent ministerial advisor, you said, and I quote, "In retrospect, it would have been better if I had not been given the note or confirmed that I was content with the appointment. This was an unfortunate error for which I express my sincere regret." Sir Laurie, in his response, stated, "It is regrettable, as you say in your letter, that despite the recusal we agreed in autumn 2024 concerning the Football Governance Bill, you were asked to confirm that you were content with the proposed appointment. Can you give this committee an update on progress of your internal review that you said to Sir Laurie would take place to ensure this breach in standards does not happen again?
Well, firstly, can I say, in relation to David Coburn, that he was first approached by the previous government for this role. And therefore, I reject the cronyism allegation, which I don't think should rightly be put in his case. He was then endorsed by the cross-party committee. So he was headhunted by the previous government because of his suitability for the role, appointed by this government and endorsed by the cross-party committee. I had recused myself in relation to the bill. The decision to appoint was for DCMS minister. That's set out in the legislation, in the statute. So I knew full well it wasn't my decision. As it happens, a note was put before me to say that's what was going to happen, and was I content? And the independent advisor took the view, which I agree with, that it would have been better if that note had never been put before me. In other words, that the recusal had meant I didn't even get the note before me. But when I said I was content, I was well aware I wasn't the decision maker, because I knew that the legislation set out who the decision maker was, and it was the minister in the relevant department by law, and therefore it couldn't be me in any event. I had actually been talking to the independent advisor about it throughout, as he makes clear in his letter. So this was I always take his advice, even if I don't think there's anything wrong, just so that I've got. But just you asked me when you asked me, I've now asked him to look again at when someone says they're recusing themselves. What are then the processes that need to be put in the office to make sure that even a decision which isn't for the recused person is coming by way of note, in effect, isn't put before them, and that's what just to make sure that we're not in that position again. But I was well aware that I was not the decision maker, because I knew by law it was the minister.
Thank you. Thanks, Prime Minister. Finally, on other public appointments, can I refer you to your recent decision as Prime Minister on appointments to the House of Lords? Prior to the general election, you promised to reduce political appointments to the Lords, and indeed stated as much in your party's manifesto. Might you understand why the public might feel that you're not upholding the high standards you set yourself on appointments to the House of Lords?
Well, it's important that the House of Lords is able to do its vital work of scrutinising legislation. There's an imbalance in the Lords at the moment in the numbers of peers for the relevant political parties, and it's right that we get the balance right as we go forward. But the overarching work to reduce the size of the House of Lords is ongoing. The Hereditary Peers Bill has been going through, and it is important.
My question, it was specifically about your comments prior to the general election and the decision that you made last week. But thank you very much, Prime Minister, for the answers that you've given.
Thank you. Simon Hoare, MP.
Thank you, Chair. Prime Minister, good afternoon. Public trust is pivotal if governance of this country and all of our public life is to be supported and trusted, and that is, I'm afraid, it seems to be a value which is declining, the trust of the public in what we do and why we do it. Baroness Deach, before my committee last week, commented, it's quite interesting how oppositions change their position on standards from when they're in opposition to then going into government. We're doing a piece of work which is clearly showing that notwithstanding Nolan, notwithstanding the EIC, notwithstanding amendments to the ministerial code, there is still an element of what I suppose in the old terms you could have called the good chaps principle, HOLAC, etc. In order to future-proof against rogue operators. And in order to try to bolster declining public confidence, what consideration, if any, have you given or might you give to putting quite a lot of these bodies on a statutory footing, including the ethics advisor at number 10, so that the public can see that there are dispassionate people who take decisions based on good judgment and sound evidence?
Prime Minister.
Yeah, I mean, on the ministerial code, obviously, I did strengthen, and then I also took the step. The independent advisor, before I became Prime Minister, was not able to initiate investigations, could only do it with the Prime Minister's approval, and I thought that was wrong in principle, and that we would it would be better if the independent advisor, who was appointed under the last government but continued under me, had the ability to say of his own volition, I think this is serious enough for me to look at it. So I have done that. I'm not convinced at the moment we need to go further and put on a statutory basis, but I never close my mind to further steps that could be taken, whether it's in relation to the independent advisor or any of the other relevant bodies.
Thank you very much. So we now move on to the Plan for Change, which was the government's plan on entering government, and the 5 missions that were established. And I'm going to ask Helen Hayes to kick off on the Opportunity Mission. Helen Hayes.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Prime Minister.
Good afternoon.
Prime Minister, your personal commitment to further education and skills is really clear, and we've seen some positive announcements from the government in relation to technical excellence colleges and qualifications reform in the skills white paper. But my committee has recently completed an inquiry on further education and skills, and we found that there are 2 areas that are really holding the FE sector back at the moment. The first of those is that, unlike other post-16 education providers, FE colleges and standalone sixth form colleges are unable to claim VAT back on their expenditure. This is a tax for which there is no a tax position for which there is no justification, and my committee was very clear on that from the evidence that we found. Will you undertake to speak to the Treasury about this anomaly, which is holding post-16 education providers back from delivering against the government's mission?
I certainly have a look at it and talk to the Treasury about it. I'm very keen to do what we can to further education. I think it's part of the system that needs more work, more resource, more capability, and more weight behind it. So I'll certainly have a look at that issue.
Thank you very much. As an example of the scale of change, a difference that would make, a college that my committee visited told us that the amount that they were unable to claim back in VAT made the difference between a whole extra story on a new building that they had recently completed that they weren't able to add to that building. The second area that my committee found as a problem for the FE sector is the disparity in teacher pay for teachers teaching the same subjects within FE colleges compared with schools. A pay disparity of up to 15% makes it really, really hard for them to recruit the teachers that they need, and also difficulties in getting people from industry to come and teach on within the further education sector. On a recent visit to Switzerland, we found that the Swiss rail system pay their staff more. They get an extra premium if they are prepared to undertake training for apprentices within the rail system. We've just had the announcement on the setting up of Great British Rail. Will you look at the premium that is placed on training for the next generation of the rail industry within the leverage that you have with Great British Rail, and seek to learn from Switzerland on how important it is that the next generation are really well trained?
Yeah, I wasn't aware of the Swiss experience and approach, but certainly very willing to have a look at that. I mean, we do need, in terms of further education colleges, we need to improve the skills, the courses, focus them and make sure they link with the work that those coming out are most likely to be able to do. The retention and recruitment of teachers is hugely important in that sector for some of the reasons you set out. So anything we can do to help in that regard, I'll certainly have a look at the Swiss example and see whether some or all of it can be applied here in the United Kingdom.
Thank you. And then final question from me. We've also seen some really positive announcements from the government on opportunities for young people through the Youth Guarantee and the Youth Strategy announced last week. We've spoken previously in this committee about some of the barriers that hold care-experienced young people back from being able to take advantage of opportunities that are available to them. The government is still resistant to a national offer for care leavers, which would provide confidence and clarity for care leavers across the country that wherever they live, the same support and entitlements would be available to them. Will you look again at that commitment, which would really enable care leavers to be able to access some of the great opportunities the government is making available to young people across the country?
Yes, and certainly in the context of the Youth Guarantee, that would be a sensible place to start in relation to the support that's going in from 13 weeks for 2 years and then into, if necessary, after 18 months, the offer of a job that the government will support with business so that young people can actually get into a job, which I think will make a material difference as a stepping stone to them. But certainly happy to look at for care leavers where there's anything in the Youth Guarantee or the Youth Strategy for that matter.
If you're a care leaver who can't access housing or you can't access help with transport costs, which some care leavers can and some can't, depending where you live in the country, you're not going to be able to access the 13 weeks of training to get into employment.
Certainly happy to look at that again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Andy Slaughter MP.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Prime Minister. Sir Brian Levison's independent review of the criminal courts has 45 recommendations in Part 1 alone, but the controversy around it is centred on changes to the jury system, specifically the mode of trial which will apply in intermediate cases. The plans seem to involve a quarter to a half of current jury trials being heard by magistrates or a judge sitting alone. Yet we are told this will only affect about 1 or 2% of all criminal trials. So it's difficult to see how it will address the Crown Court backlog. Would it not be sensible to postpone decision on the future of jury trials until we have more reliable information and can see what the impact on the backlog will be?
Well, I mean, firstly, just putting those figures into context, of all the cases that go to court, criminal cases that go to court in this country, 90% are in the Magistrates' Court and therefore don't have a jury in any event. 10% go to the Crown Court, where there's the potential for a jury. 7% of those plead guilty, and therefore, of all the criminal cases that go to our criminal courts, 3% currently go before a jury. They're the most serious. The proposals that Brian Levison has recommended, and he's a highly respected judge, and would change that to about 2.25%. On its own, I accept the challenge that will not on its own be the silver bullet that speeds up our criminal cases, but it is one element of a package. And I'm acutely aware that victims in our criminal justice system are waiting too long for justice. I'm particularly concerned about violence against women and girls, where all the indicators are that still 60% of victims and survivors will not make it through to the final hurdle of being in court because they'll have dropped out along the way, either pre-charge, during charge, because they're waiting 3 or 4 years to give their evidence. And even in the last week, I've had examples of a 14-year-old who gave evidence when she was 18 and was cross-examined uphill and down Dale about that. Very hard 4 years after the event to deal with that. Or a young woman who was 16 at the time of the alleged offence and giving evidence when she was a young woman of 20. That isn't acceptable, and we have to do whatever we can to improve that. And our criminal justice system has been too slow for too long. This isn't just a recent phenomenon. I've been on this for the best part of 20 years.
Mr. Slaughter.
It's also the case that, and this is not in the Levison report, that magistrates' court sentences are proposed to go from, until very recently, 6 months for an offence up to a maximum of 24 months. And swift courts will involve a judge sitting alone without magistrates. As I say, they're not in Levison, so why is the government going down this route? And isn't this more likely to lead to the unintended consequence of even more custodial sentences, undoing the work of reducing prison numbers as set out in the Sentencing Bill and the Gork Review?
No, I don't think so. I mean, look, the most serious crimes will still go before a jury. So anything over 3 years, all indictable only offences, rape, murder, manslaughter, GBH, robbery, arson with intent to kill, all those very serious offences still go before our juries. But we have to answer the question, how do we speed up the processes that we have? How do we make a system that measures the delivery of justice in months, not years, and it's been years for far too long. Sir Brian Leveson painted the picture of the system in virtual crisis. We cannot go on like that. In relation to the sentencing point, obviously this goes alongside the changes that we're making in relation to sentencing and various presumptions that are there at the same time. So the two of them have to go together. Of course, we need to keep looking at it, to keep checking that we've got it right. But I, for one, am not prepared anymore to just walk past what has been a stain on our criminal justice system for far too long, and I'm absolutely determined to do something about it.
Slaughter.
There's widespread support for the Hillsborough Bill, not least because it offers equality of arms between victims and the state in addressing unlawful state action. Doesn't the same inequality exist between the press and those who, in Jerry McCann's words, are monstered by them? But 13 years after the Leveson Review of Press Ethics, most newspapers are not subject to independent regulation, and there is no low-cost way to challenge media errors. Last week, over 30 victims of press intrusion, including Christine Flack, Kate and Jerry McCann, and Margaret Aspinall, whom you know, and whose son James died at Hillsborough, wrote to you to ask you to meet them and discuss their experiences. Will you meet them?
Yes, of course.
Finally, can I ask this? AI, artificial intelligence, can violate individual privacy, entrench discrimination, or hinder access to justice. You've put AI at the heart of the government's mission for growth. But how can you be sure increased use of AI will not lead to a weakening of human rights protection?
Well, we need to get the balance right. I think with AI, it's a huge opportunity. There's huge potential. Whether that's in health, where already we're seeing the difference it can make. I've seen for myself some of the use of AI to identify blood clots in stroke victims much more quickly than can be done otherwise, and literally saving lives. Equally, AI with heart monitors that can predict problems of the future and allow preventative measures to be taken. In criminal justice, it is already being used in probation in relation to a huge amount of material. And I know that the judiciary are interested in how it can improve criminal justice. Now, it needs to be within a framework, an architecture that is aware of and attuned to the risks, of course. But I don't think we should, for that reason, take the decision that we wouldn't use AI where it can improve criminal justice or the delivery of all our public services.
No, I don't think anyone's saying that, but it can include personal data, it can be discriminatory, and it can lack transparency, and that needs some human oversight, doesn't it?
Yeah, we do need to make sure we've got the balance right, and where there are potentials for risk, then we need to put measures in place. I completely accept that.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We know that the Joint Committee on Human Rights, as well as a number of other committees in this House, are looking at a lot of these very issues. I'm sure they'll be feeding that into the government's thinking on this. So thank you. Karen Bradley, Dame Karen Bradley.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Prime Minister, for being before us. When will the government publish the new Violence Against Women and Girls strategy?
As soon as possible, and I was in Downing Street when we brought together all of the various bodies that are helping work with us on that the week before last, and so now we're looking at very shortly in the future. I think the sooner we can get. Well, I would hope to do it as soon as possible. I don't want to commit to a date that ends up not being possible. But I'm not. I mean, I'll be clear with you. I want it out as soon as possible. I'm really pleased with the work we're doing on this. We've got incredibly good individuals and organisations working with us on it. And so we will get it published as soon as we can.
The Home Secretary was on the media round yesterday talking about things that will be in the strategy. I expected we'd have a statement today on it. I'm very surprised we've not got it, if she can do the media round on it.
Yeah, I mean, we're very close. I think we're just finishing off the final bits in the strategy. But I do want to get it out as quickly as
I
possible.
think, Prime Minister, I mean, in response to Mr. De Costa, was saying how you thought in statements the House were important, and here's an example of one where there was a lot being discussed by ministers in the media to the public, but not to Parliament.
Yeah,
Which is it?
Well, the strategy is not. I mean, we'll do the strategy in due course, but I mean, it's one.
The government said it would come out before the summer. It then was going to be in September. We've been told time and again it was going to come very soon, and we're still waiting for it. And it's having real world consequences. 3 rape crisis centres, I know, have closed because services cannot be commissioned because the local authorities, etc., do not know what money they're going to have because they don't have the strategy.
No, I want the strategy out as quickly as possible. There are measures we put in place already. The use of specialist in 999 control rooms has been widely welcomed. The National Policing Centre for Violence Against Women and Girls has been established, the domestic abuse protection orders. So there's a number of measures we've already taken. But I mean, I'm not pushing back on it. I want the strategy out as quickly as possible. We just need to finalise it and get it out.
We all do. £53 million has been committed to perpetrator programmes for highest risk perpetrators. There hasn't been a similar amount of money for victims' services. And there's a real disquiet in the sector that actually the victims are being forgotten. What would you say?
Certainly the victims not being forgotten. They're at the centre of the strategy on violence against women and girls.
There's no money for them that's been committed so
far.
far.
I'll look at the money commitments again and make sure that we've got that right. But this is a commitment of the government in relation to violence against women and girls. It's a personal commitment of mine. I've been working on this since I became the Director of Public Prosecution.
I remember when you shadowed me when I was in the Home Office. That's why I'm surprised.
No, I genuinely want to do as much as we possibly can. The figures on violence against women and girls are appalling. They've been appalling for a long time. 3 women a week killed by their partner or ex-partner, and that's been the statistic that's been there ever since I've been looking at it, well over 20 years. And we have to shift that, and we need to do that with the strategy and pull together all of the individuals and organisations who've got huge experience here, and that's why I brought them all into Downing Street as a group the week before last.
We'll look forward to the strategy.
Yeah.
Another thing we're waiting for is the police reform white paper, which again we were expecting we'd have by now. Do you think there are too many police forces in England and Wales?
Well, I'm not going to speculate in relation to that. I do think we need to...
Prime Minister, you were DPP. You might have a view on this.
Look, when I was DPP, we reduced the number of CPS areas from 42 to 13. So we streamlined that. I'm well aware that you also have to look at where the courts are streamlined, where probation is streamlined, etc. But no decisions have been made about this yet. But are there some functions that could be across forces? Yes, I think there probably are, and where that's been possible, it's worked well. Are there some areas such as, the uniforms, the police cars, that could be better looked at across a number of forces? Yes, I absolutely think there are. So I'm up for rationalising it, but no decision on what the final configuration has been arrived at in relation to that.
Put a plea in for Staffordshire, having had what happened to Staffordshire ambulance services when we merged into West Midlands. I think we'd like to keep our police in Staffordshire.
No, I completely get that. And the chief constable knowing his or her patch is really important.
Really is.
The question is I've approached it slightly differently, which is, are the sort of structural issues where you could look at types of offence which aren't usually confined within a county border, where we could make better use of work across forces than we are at the moment, rather than just a structural reset in terms of numbers isn't, I think, the answer to this. The answer is probably looking at the functions and where those functions sit.
Thank you, and we'll look forward to the white paper. I want to finish on asylum accommodation. The government said that they were looking to open large sites in Crowborough and Inverness by the end of November. They've not opened yet. When will they open?
As soon as we're satisfied that they're ready, but we have got military sites under consideration. Obviously, we need to make sure that they're suitable and that all the necessary checks have been carried out. But we do want, asylum hotels were at their height measured, I think it was 400 or so. They're down to about 200 now. I'm absolutely determined that we will close them by the end of this Parliament, sooner if it's possible, and that's why military sites are under consideration.
Can you understand the how local residents feel and the uncertainty there is? They've been told that they've been identified as a site. They don't know when it's going to open. They don't know what the clientele are going to be. And there is real concern. And you know the MPs that represent those areas have made representations to me as chair of the Select Committee. But we really need to understand how this is going to affect local areas. Can you sympathise with that?
I do understand that. And in the end, the question needs to move away from where are we housing people whose asylum claims haven't been processed to how can we more quickly get the lists down so we don't have to go through the exercise of housing them anywhere or for very long. We inherited record levels of claims because they weren't being properly processed under the last government. We are bringing them down as quickly as we can. But for me, that has to be a priority because in the end, whether it's hotels or other accommodation or military sites, the better answer to the question is how do we get the numbers down in the first place?
Thank you very much, Minister. Patricia Ferguson, MP.
Thank you, Chair. Prime Minister, earlier this year, the UK's first sanctioned drug consumption facility opened in Glasgow. It's called the Thistle, and it exists because of a statement of prosecution policy given to it by the Lord Advocate. In the Scottish Affairs Committee's report, we urged the Government to take an evidence-based approach to the facility's future. In its response, the Home Office has reiterated that it will not amend the law to put the facility on a sound legal footing. Given the scale of Scotland's drug crisis, with the highest death rates in Europe from drug overdoses and drug abuse, can you commit to reconsidering the position if the evaluation from the pilot shows that the facility has been effective in reducing drug deaths and drug harms?
Yep. First, let me pick up on your absolutely valid point that there are just an unacceptable, a terribly high number of drug-related deaths in Scotland, particularly in Glasgow, which is very much the focus of this discussion. We've looked at it and we do not intend to amend the law, but the way, as I understand it, that the scheme operates in Scotland, which allows it to take account of factors that are peculiar or more focused, I should say, in Scotland, particularly the high number of deaths, in relation to prosecutorial discretion in terms of what action will follow if these centres are set up. So that is an area which, to my mind, is rightly better taken by those in Scotland addressing the particular issues that they have. But I don't think it should lead to a wider UK-wide changing of the drug laws.
Thank you very much indeed, Prime Minister. Cat Smith, MP.
Thank you, Chair. Prime Minister, you've repeatedly said that the economic mission of this government is to be on the side of working people. Is that still your position?
Yes.
Yes. And do you consider farmers, many of whom are getting up at 4 a.m, working 365 days a year, feeding the nation, to be working people, yes or no?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Because last year, rural communities, including many farmers, put their trust in Labour for the very first time in a very long time and gave us a mandate for change in this country. However, and I hear this from many of the 950 farm holdings in my constituency, feel like they were misled around the changes to IHT and APR, which are going to pull the rug from underneath farming communities and obliterate the family farm for many farmers. We're in a situation now where elderly farmers or farmers with terminal diagnosis are in a position whereby if they die before April, their farm will pass to the next generation with no tax implications. But if they die after, the potential of their family farm being completely unviable. Can you see how farmers can feel like this government hasn't necessarily treated them in the way that they expect to be treated as working people?
Well, look, I do understand the concern, and I met with the president of the NFU just last week, as I've met with him before, to run through the particular concerns they have. I do think on agricultural property relief, there had to be sensible reform, and I think this is sensible reform. We did make an amendment in the budget, obviously, in relation to the spousal transfer, and more generally, we are sustaining £11.8 billion in sustainable farming this Parliament, so there's a lot of money set aside in the budget. There's a roadmap that we're agreeing with farmers as to the way forward, and of course, Minette Batters, the ex-president of the NFU, has just completed a report for us on profitability and how we drive up profitability year on year, which I think is vitally important because in a sense that's the missing factor here, which is the amount of money that farmers can make year on year, and we need to drive that amount up.
And the issue with the money that was in the budget is I think it's been overshadowed in the same way the Countryside Stewardship Fund has been overshadowed by the IHT issue. And I think that the political damage is that whilst the ambitions of government were, I think, quite right in terms of tackling tax avoidance that could go on in, like, say, large country estates, the collateral damage is that it's actually the small family farm which is feeling the hit of this. And the changes in the budget won't go any way to benefit one of my constituents who is 89 next month. He's already widowed, so he will not be able to benefit from the spousal transfer that has been announced. And given that you've been a Prime Minister who is, and I think quite admirably, changed courses in the past when issues have been exposed to the absolute reality of things, would you consider changing course on this issue?
Well, firstly, let me just reassure. The vast majority, 3/4, I think, of farmers simply not affected at all. And of those that are affected, the rate that's paid is half the rate that's over a 10-year period. In relation to the particular example, if you're happy to give me further details, I'll certainly have my team
Happy, right, to the Prime Minister.
look at that.
One final question, Chair, if I may, and this won't have sunk in, I don't think, is the Prime Minister aware that some farmers who have terminal diagnosis now are actively planning to expedite their own deaths so they hit before April? Is he aware of that?
I've had discussions with a number of individuals who've drawn all manner of things to my attention.
Thank you very much. Alistair Carmichael, MP.
And you understand, Prime Minister, that the basis for that actually sits in the finance bill itself. It's the provision called the anti-forestalling clause. You're familiar with the anti-forestalling clause, I think? Yeah, that means that anyone who transfers their property or their farm to a descendant but dies within 7 years will be liable to pay inheritance tax under the new system, and if they don't live 7 years after that, it could even trigger capital gains tax. If you do nothing, though, and you die before April next year, then the estate passes tax-free. Do we agree, Prime Minister, that nobody should be left feeling, as Cat Smith has just described, that they would be better off dying between now and next April?
No, of course. But governments have to bring about sensible reform and take
sensible
measures
reform, absolutely.
But things like anti-forestalling clause, they are not unique to this situation. But on a human level, the answer to your question is, of course, not.
But last year, you told me that this was a policy that was just aimed at revenue raising, that it wasn't targeted at anybody in particular. We've now seen the anti-forestalling clause, and we know from Treasury's own figures that 75% of the £500 million that is expected to be raised from this will come from farmers who die over the age of 75. So, is it not the case that actually this is a targeted measure, and it is targeted at, and it will affect those who are elderly, suffering from terminal illnesses over 75, and it doesn't matter if it's one farmer or 1,000 farmers. Surely you cannot be comfortable with that.
Let me just address the point that it's not targeted. It's not targeted at individuals.
Well, it was what you said last year.
It's not targeted, as I said last year. It's an economic reform which we took in the budget before last. Not targeted. It is to adjust the rate at which inheritance tax is, the fact that it's paid, the rate at which it's paid, and the period over which it is paid. But it's not targeted against individuals. I'm not arguing with you that there are therefore going to be individuals affected, as there are with any change in any tax regime. But there's a difference between changing the tax regime and targeting a group of individuals. This is about changing the tax regime.
The anti-forestalling clause that we've spoken about traps farmers into the new rules. It doesn't allow them the same opportunities that other taxpayers will have to use tax planning to manage their affairs in a sensible way that will allow the succession of family farms in this country.
That doesn't make it targeted. It is a necessary consequence of the decisions that we've taken. But I can assure you, as you would expect, the President of the NFU has raised this issue with me on more than one occasion.
Not just the President of the NFU.
Well, I appreciate that.
You've heard it from Cat Smith, you've heard it from my Select Committee, you've heard it from the Welsh Affairs Select Committee, you've heard it from the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee. These are all select committees, incidentally, that have majorities from the Labour Party, and they have all produced unanimous reports calling for this to be paused and rethought. You don't have to listen to me. You don't even have to listen to the farmers out there. You don't have to listen to the President of the NFU. But why do you not listen to your own party colleagues?
I do listen to party colleagues all the time.
And then do what you're going to do anyway.
Thank you very much, Mr Carmichael. Tandesi MP.
Thank you very much. Prime Minister, you rightly noted that defence is an engine for growth. In fact, one of the 8 high growth sectors that are best placed to deliver on growth and on jobs. But there was hardly anything new for defence within the budget. And how can it therefore be an engine for growth if we do not have a clear, credible approach to increasing defence spending, not just up to 2027, but we need to give confidence to the supply chain well beyond that, rather than just having this hockey stick approach whereby most of the increase in defence spending is always planned for years and years into the future?
Well, I think there was quite a big measure in the budget in that we increased defence spending to 2.6, not years and years in the future, but in 2027. It
was previously announced about a year ago as well. So
that then is baked into the budget and affects all the other figures in terms of what else we can do. I do think you're right that the challenge, therefore, is to turn that into growth and productivity. And the way in which we intend to do that is we had the Strategic Defence Review, as you know, published earlier this year. And we are now pushing forward with the Defence Investment Plan that is on the back of that, where the actual decisions get taken in terms of how we put the Defence Review forward. But the other thing we've done is to create a hub for smaller businesses that can feed in to the defence spend, so that the extra money that's spent on defence can be felt in different communities through different businesses. On top of that, as you will be aware, we are taking the opportunities to sign big deals with other countries. With Norway, we signed a big deal for frigates, £10 billion to be built in the Clyde, and with Turkey, Typhoons, £8 billion, predominantly to be put together, assembled in Lancashire. And they then boost that local economy, but there are many businesses that feed into that.
Okay, well, it still doesn't answer my underlying question, but let's move on. I'm glad that you mentioned the Strategic Defence Review and the Defence Investment Plan. Now, anybody and everybody, including the NATO Secretary-General, is saying that we need to prepare, given the increased propensity and the intensity of attacks, especially cyber, from our adversaries. Now, in order to give a clear demand signal to industry and all, there needs to be a defence investment plan. Now, that was promised to us by autumn, and it's Christmas next week. I know some would take the interpretation that they're waiting for the winter solstice this Sunday in order then that's still within the autumn, but that really is taking the biscuit. So I think what we need to have is that defence investment plan. When is that defence investment plan landing, Prime Minister?
Well, we're working hard on the defence investment plan, and we will publish it as soon as it's ready. But you will appreciate from the work of your committee that that involves very significant and important decisions that we need to make sure we get absolutely right. But we'll do it as soon as it's ready, and obviously
so
your committee will then want to.
You reshuffled out the Defence Procurement Minister at the last reshuffle. Was that wise to do when you're going through a defence investment plan process?
Well, defence investment plan process involves quite a number of cabinet members because of the significance of the decisions that we're
But the engine
making.
room of that job, that's a very important job in government, to make sure that procurement
Yes, and the
is done
minister we've
properly.
got in doing it is doing an excellent job, and that is not affected.
I'm not suggesting individuals aren't, just that the continuity is quite important.
Yeah, but the defence investment plan is a very significant plan involving a number of cabinet members, as you would expect, because of its significance.
Yeah, I mean, the way it's being interpreted by all and sundry outside is that the government is still arguing about money and it's holding up the dip. But let me move on to another thing that was mentioned in the Strategic Defence Review, namely the national conversation. Now, that's something that requires your personal leadership, as you have intimated, because we need to make the public aware about the threats, but also their role within defence. So can you list the engagements that you personally have led and undertaken with regards to a national conversation?
Yeah, what I envisage is a national conversation that goes on around the country. I mean, I've obviously led a number of conversations about the importance of defence and security. I am obviously, in relation to Ukraine, we've been playing a leading part in the coalition of the willing, which is bringing together about 35 countries now to provide security guarantees. I've made it clear in my conversations that I see that as a response, a necessary response to the situation in Ukraine, but also as part of a bigger argument, which is I do think that for too many years now, pretty well all European countries have not done enough on defence and security, and we need to step up in terms of not just spend, but capability and coordination. And it falls to leaders now to make that argument, because the threat from Russia is very clear, very real. It's not just in Ukraine. And so part of the conversation, as I see it, that I have to lead, and quite rightly, is to make the argument for more defence and security, a bigger answer on defence and security, so that Europe is better able to defend itself. I will always believe in the Euro-Atlantic security mechanisms, but I do think it's time for European countries to step into the breach on spend capability coordination.
I want to bring
Europe.
my final point on to what's happening, and there's a lot of hard work that's been undertaken by yourself abroad, especially to ensure that there's a just and lasting peace for our Ukrainian friends who we are rightly supporting. You're trying to keep together the transatlantic NATO alliance, especially in the midst of a very unpredictable ally in terms of the new Trump administration. But if all goes pear-shaped at home, then all of that hard work would be unravelled. And we've got a lot of perennial procurement problems within defence, namely the Ajax, Boxer vehicles and MAN SVs. So how are you going to ensure that there is value for money within defence procurement?
Oh, by the increased oversight that we're putting in, because I don't think there has been enough focus on value for money in procurement, and we need to change that. But just to reassure you, I mean, in terms of what's happening in Ukraine, we cannot let up in our efforts to bring about a just and lasting peace. That affects Ukraine, Europe, and it affects the United Kingdom. We can see Russian intent in terms of land, in terms of what they've been doing in our waters, in cyber, what happened at Salisbury not so many years ago. We have to be alert to that ever-present danger from Russia, and therefore the work that we do in Ukraine, I'm going straight to Berlin after this to continue that, is to ensure that we deal not just with the terrible conflict in Ukraine that's been going on for nearly 4 years now, Russian aggression exacting a very heavy price in Ukraine, but it's about our defence and security as well, and that's why it's such a central focus of what I've been doing.
Thank you. Can you talk about having a conversation and leading a conversation? Who are you having these conversations with, Prime Minister?
Oh, in terms of defence and security, all the other countries involved in the coalition,
internationally,
all of the work we're doing in the media in this country in relation to different communities, the discussions I have in every community I go to where there's
you mean
a
say
defence
communities,
industry.
you mean geographical communities?
Okay, Lancashire for the Turkish deal, I went there to talk to the communities there about the impact.
When you say communities, you mean
the workforce, their families, their communities. The same in the Clyde. I went to talk to the apprentices, to the workforce, and their wider communities. I mean, they're two examples, but we're doing this across the country. It needs to be, I would accept the challenge, it needs to be more formalised into a conversation, which is what we envisaged in the strategic review, and that's a bit of work that needs to be fast-forwarded, in my view. But the conversation in terms of the dangers we're facing and what we have to do to step up to those dangers and what that means for strategic decisions in this country.
We've got the conversation, and then it's the delivery that Mr Dessy was highlighting as needs to happen. Thank you. Mr Eston MP.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Prime Minister. The energy price cap is set to be £83 higher in April next year than it was at the general election. That's after the budget measures that your Chancellor has announced. Energy costs are set to increase as a result of improvements to the network and new generation, including Sizewell C. They're going to go on to consumer bills. Chris Stark, your own champion, says that energy bills will be slightly lower in the run-up to 2030. Is there a danger, Prime Minister, that people will say you haven't kept your promise to reduce energy bills by £300?
Well, as you will have seen from the budget, we're taking every step that we can to reduce energy bills, and that's why in the budget we took the decision to reduce energy bills to take £150 off bills for every household. That, as you know in your committee very well, is in addition to the £150 that we've taken off by way of discount for last year. It was the 3 million of poorest households. We've now doubled that to the 6 million poorest households. We need to take further measures that accept your challenge, but I'm also absolutely clear that the only long-term way to get energy prices down is to make the transition to renewables, because energy prices are, at the moment, still a reflection of the fossil fuel market that we are on, the international market, which of course has been profoundly impacted by Ukraine over the last 4 years.
Thank you.
Certainly, thank you. And the point that Chris Stark is making is it will take until 2030 to start to see them coming down. You don't have very long to get that £300 reduction.
No, that's why we're pulling every lever. I'm well aware that for many families, vast majority, the cost of living is the single most important issue, and that their energy bills are one of the bills they worry about the most, which is why we took the decision in the budget to take that £150 off bills. But do we need to do more? Yes, we do need to do more. Do we need to get to the transition to renewables more quickly? Do we need to try and resolve the situation in Ukraine for a whole bunch of reasons, but among them the fact that Ukraine has affected our energy bills more than anything else in the last 5 years or so.
Thank you. The latest climate science, meanwhile, suggests a doubling of the carbon emissions since 2017, and the actuarial analysis that unless we have an immediate and dramatic change in approach, we could see a GDP fall of 20% in the next 20 years. How do you address this challenge? The UK has shown great leadership internationally, but this latest evidence is really, really stark.
Yeah, I think with climate change, we've got to see this not just as an obligation, but also as a huge opportunity. As we go to renewable energy, there's a global race on, and huge amounts of investment are being put around the globe into different countries on renewables. I'm really pleased that we're attracting a good deal of that investment because of the clarity of our policy, and more money has come in by way of foreign investment into this country on renewables and clean power than on any of our other sectors. So we've got to take advantage of those opportunities, and therefore it won't be an inhibitor on growth, it will be an engine for growth if we get this right.
Okay, and coming to this point about the leadership you've shown internationally, the commitment to an 81% reduction in nationally determined contributions, which is now the second highest, as Denmark's gone 1% higher since 1990, but that's something to be very, very proud of. You decided not to make a financial commitment to the Tropical Forest Forever facility. Isn't there a danger that rather undermines the climate leadership that you've shown up till now?
Well, on the TFFF, we've been there as a sort of founder member, if you like, supporting the TFFF. We've been absolutely clear that we see a role for the United Kingdom going forward of leveraging private investment into TFFF, which is very much where the conversation is in terms of funding for projects, and the future will continue to do that and to look at what else we can do. But we remain committed to the concept, the idea, and I've made that absolutely clear to the President in Brazil when I was there for COP just a few weeks ago.
Yeah, now I mentioned Denmark. The Danes have been at this for a very long time. It was their response to the 1973 oil crisis was to try and find alternatives. In Denmark, people grow up to be told that a good Dane is a green Dane. Do we need something similar here to get greater public support for this energy transition?
I think there is a growing awareness. I think most people would say they absolutely understand the challenge of climate change. They want their government to do something about it. I think they would add that they don't want to necessarily see that reflected simply in their bills, at the expense of other measures that can be taken. So I don't think there's a lack of commitment on this. There's an understandable issue in a cost of living crisis as to where the burden lies in relation to the funding of it, which is why, amongst other things, we want to take and did take £150 off energy bills. I think the vast majority of the public do understand we have to take measures on climate change. They can see the effects in this country and other countries with ever more extreme weather conditions. The question is more, I don't think we've got climate deniers anymore, we've simply got climate delayers, those that think we should put it off. I'm not in that camp, I think that's a mistake. But I am heartened by the fact that there's fewer and fewer deniers, but we do need to get on with this now.
So maybe you'll consider the idea that a good Brit is a green Brit.
Well, I'm not sure about that. I mean, I'm sure the Green Party would seize on that in a moment. But look, many more people cycle and walk and are conscious of when they're buying things, what they're buying, and make conscious choices in relation to it. I think their plea would not be don't do the transition to clean power. Their plea would be make sure that it's affordable to families like mine.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Patricia Ferguson, MP.
Thank you, Chair. A recent report by the Scottish Affairs Committee found that clean energy jobs, the creation of clean energy jobs, not being keeping scale or pace with the loss of jobs in the oil and gas industry. Harbour Energy UK, the largest oil and gas producer, has indicated that one of the reasons it's cut 350 jobs this year is the UK's tax regime. How does the budget decision to retain the energy profits levy align with the government's commitment to protect existing North Sea jobs and to deliver that fair and orderly energy transition we'd all like to see?
Well, just putting this into context, I think over the last decade or so, probably 70,000 jobs or so have been lost in oil and gas, and there's a declining base. And therefore the transition to renewables is really important, and there are lots of investment opportunities in renewables, and that we need to make that transition. It needs to be a fair and just transition, particularly for those in Scotland who we thank for everything they've put into our energy supply for a very, very long time, but we do need to make that transition. In relation to Harbour Energy, ultimately that was a commercial decision by the business, but that doesn't take away the impact that will have had on those working there and their families and their communities. In relation to the tax, we've made it clear when the tax will end and looked at how the tax works, but it is important that we make the transition to renewables because in the end that will guarantee generations worth of jobs in Scotland and elsewhere. We are committed to oil and gas being part of the mix for many years to come. And obviously we made changes to the tieback scheme just recently, which is something the sector had been asking us specifically to deliver on. I'm pleased we've been able to do that.
Thank you, Ms Ferguson.
I think our committee was very concerned, however, that the scale and pace of the creation of the new jobs in the new industry was not anywhere near close to the number of jobs that we're losing in the oil and gas sector. However, if we look at some specific jobs that we lost at Grangemouth, earlier this year, you yourself, Prime Minister, ring-fenced £200 million from the National Wealth Fund to support Grangemouth going forward. We haven't seen any concrete proposals coming forward as a result of that funding, although there was a good announcement last week that has come from other funding announced in the budget. Can you tell us why delivery of those changes, new jobs at Grangemouth, is taking so long?
Yeah, look, well, firstly, we obviously put a £100 million package in to support the community, invest in the local workforce, along with tailored support on good alternative jobs. Then we announced the £200 million from the National Wealth Fund for co-investment with the private sector. That has yielded about 100 inquiries from the private sector, which is a good thing, so we need to go through those. And at the budget, just a few weeks ago, we announced over £14 million to support the projects that are viable going forward from that. So what we're doing is whittling that down. There has been a good level of support. I'm really pleased that that has happened. I think that is at least partly because we indicated we'd put the £200 million down through the National Wealth Fund. Now we need to work through those that are viable and put the support. That's why the £14 million was put down, to support the options that are viable so that we can go with it. I think Grangemouth has a huge potential future, by the way. I think it's, I absolutely do not see it as one of those cases where decline is inevitable. I think that the potential for Grangemouth is huge, particularly carbon capture and other projects, and so we need to seize that and make sure that Grangemouth is the successful future that I know it can be.
Do you think we will see new jobs being created in Grangemouth soon?
Yes, I hope so, and what we need to do is obviously have a support package for the workers that are there at the moment and work as quickly as possible to bring these inquiries and opportunities to fruition.
We were worried in the committee that Grangemouth might in effect be the canary in the room and might be the precursor to other such losses, and of course within a month of our report being produced we saw the proposed closure of Mossmoran, putting another 400 jobs at risk. Now, Exxon has also said that UK policy environment drove the decision to focus its business elsewhere in the world. We are aware, however, that they have closed a plant in France and are likely to close one in China too. But what does the loss of that strategic asset at Mossmoran say about our ability to compete globally for industrial investment?
Well, on Mossmoran, again, I have to recognise it's a very difficult time for the workforce there. To reassure you and others that we engaged constructively with the company over a 6-month period to see whether it was possible to put a viable plan together, because we recognise the importance of it. In the end, it was consistent with decisions they were taking in other countries in relation to their particular project. We have to pick this up as a challenge and look at what viable options there are going forward. But I can assure you we worked hard with the company for 6 months to see whether there was an option, but the needs of the business were very substantial, and hence the measures they took in other countries as well.
Thank you very much. Simon Hall, MP.
Thank you. Prime Minister, on a scale of 1 to 10, how gutted are you by the BMA's latest strike action vote?
Oh, very gutted.
Is that 10 out of 10?
10 out of 10. It's irresponsible at any time, particularly at the moment. It comes on the back of a very substantial pay increase in the last year or so. There's a deal that we've put on the table that could have been taken forward, and so I think it's irresponsible action by the BMA, and not for the first time.
Thank you.
Okay. Maybe irresponsible, and I agree with you on that, but it's not actually surprising, is it? I mean, you've pointed to the massive pay rise last year, for which there were no productivity improvements linked at all. The BMA could be accused, but with some justification, of thinking they've got the government over a barrel, and you will eventually cough and sign the cheque if they shout enough.
Prime Minister.
Well, that's not going to happen. I mean, we've been really clear about that, and it hasn't happened. And in terms of productivity, notwithstanding the action of the BMA, in terms of waiting times and waiting lists, we brought them down, and we said we'd do 2 million extra appointments in the first year of a Labour government. We've done 5 million, and that's thanks to the NHS staff. So even in the teeth of the BMA action, we're working on productivity and heading in the right direction. Their action now puts that in jeopardy at a time of terrible flu just before Christmas.
So that is clearly going to have a negative impact, but so too is it. I mean, the supermarkets can work out when their Christmas rush is going to start and prepare for it from Easter time. There appears to have been precious little winter preparedness in NHS England this year, and when you overlay the unforeseen challenges now presented by strike action, elective surgery is being postponed or cancelled. Hospital admissions are at a record high for this time of the year, and that's before we get to the seasonal winter peak. Why was the government so underprepared for this annual thing called the winter crisis, which, because it happens every year, can no longer surely be described as a crisis?
Well, I don't accept that we were. I mean, the preparation...
Every other medical opinion says that is the case, Prime Minister.
Well, just hear me out. We started the preparations earlier. We've taken decisive action. 17 million patients have been vaccinated. That's more than this time last year, including 60,000 frontline NHS staff, more than this time last year. So, the waiting times and waiting lists are still coming down, and we're improving on ambulance times. Bit by bit, I accept it's not completely moved enough in the right direction yet. I've been through the flu figures with Chris Whitty in terms of the strain and the ability that a government has to try to deal with that. And as we all know from previous years, predicting what strain of flu and what time it's going to hit is extremely difficult to do. And I don't think anybody would say that can be attributed to the government. I think by putting a plan in place early, we've been able to take decisive action, more vaccinations. I want more still, by the way. I want the number to go up next year, but more have been vaccinated this year than last year.
Mr. Hall.
So you have now said on the record via this committee to the BMA there is no additional money on the table other than that which was being tabled over the last few days. We've recognised that their strike action is irresponsible and it is going to put an ever greater pressure on an already pressurised system because of the winter peaks in both COVID and flu. What do you expect the BMA's move next to be?
I want them to reflect on what they're doing. I think they're losing the support of the public. I also think they're losing the support of their colleagues in the NHS. You don't have to spend much time in the company of staff of the NHS.
83% of BMA members voting in support of strike action.
Resident doctors.
No, I don't.
Resident doctors doesn't suggest that they give a fig about that, does it?
Well, I would ask them to reflect on the impact this is having on the otherwise good work and the numbers going in the right direction of the NHS. The fact this is the week before Christmas with a flu problem that is very extreme, and I think they're losing the sympathy. I think they've lost the sympathy of the public, frankly, and I think they've lost the sympathy of their colleagues, their non-doctor colleagues in the health service who are getting on with their jobs, many of them on a much lesser rate of pay increase than the BMA, than the doctors got. And I'd appeal to the doctors themselves to push back against the BMA in relation to this. They are losing ground in terms of the sympathy they might otherwise have had for the difficult job that they do.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Ruth Cadbury MP.
Thank you. Welcome, Prime Minister. In 18 months, your government has announced many initiatives, quite separate ones. What have you found most difficult in delivering the plan for change?
In terms of transport or speed and ability to get things done in Parliament. We've got so many checks and balances and consultations and regulations and arm's length bodies. My own sense after 12 to 18 months in the job is that, and this is a fault of governments of all political colours, every time something has gone wrong in the past, successive governments have put in place another procedure or another body or another consultation to try to stop ourselves ever making a mistake again. My experience now as Prime Minister is of frustration that every time I go to pull a lever, there are a whole bunch of regulations, consultations, arm's length bodies that mean the action from pulling the lever to delivery is longer than I think it ought to be, which is among the reasons I want to cut down on regulation, generally and within government.
Okay, and I'm using this just as an example, but in Switzerland, they set the rail timetable 10 years in advance, then they build the infrastructure and the network in order to meet that timetable. It gives communities, passengers, freight operators and their private sector investment partners certainty. They know where they're going. Would that be a concept you would consider for defence, for housing, for education and justice?
Well, I'm not sure I'll go the full Swiss, but certainly the more decisions that can be made with sort of medium and long-term planning, the better. Setting the numbers and times of trains in 10 years' time is probably going a bit far for my liking, because I suspect that the way in which people travel and demand will change over that period of time. But the general proposition, the general proposition of look, too many decisions over the last 14, 15 years have been short-term responses to problems, not middle and long-term decisions to fix things more fundamentally. And I think we need to be in the fixing more fundamentally place. as we go through government.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Prime Minister, you sound like you were surprised that you come into government, you pull a lever, and it doesn't always happen, or perhaps something else happens over there.
Frustrated rather than surprised.
So do you consider that there was enough preparation for entering government in order that you and your ministers were ready for this?
Yes, but when it comes to regulation, we're taking it down, but it takes time to take it down. So I'm not surprised, but I'm frustrated. And it's amongst the reasons that we're trying to get rid of as much of the regulation as possible, to get rid of arm's length bodies and ensure that we can move more quickly. But that was never possible on day one.
Getting rid of arm's length bodies, you think, is going to make things go more quickly?
Well, we need to look at the number we've got and what they actually add. I'm not saying get rid of them all, of course, but I think there is a frustration. I think this is shared across the last government and this government, that there's a sort of thicket of reasons you can't do anything, rather than a clear path through at speed, and it's the clear path through at speed that we need.
Okay, well, thank you. Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. As Chair of the Public Accounts Committee, I'd like to raise with you a report that we published in 2024 into sensitive government scrutiny. It is conventional, as you know, for the government to reply to committee reports within 2 months of publication. However, 18 months on, my committee has yet to receive a government response. Dame Meg and I are grateful to you for your response to our letter sent earlier this month, and we welcome your assurance that cross-government work that you are now leading on this issue. However, please would you undertake to meet with Dame Meg, the Controller and Auditor General, and myself in private as soon as possible in the new year, because we'd like to ensure that you're fully appraised of the detail of our proposal.
Yeah, I'm very happy to meet.
Thank you.
I do understand the issue. Obviously, there's a careful balance to be struck, but I understand the concerns that you and the Chair have raised, and very happy to agree to a private meeting to discuss further.
Thank you very much. Florence Eshalomi MP.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Prime Minister. Earlier you mentioned to Mr Costa in terms of making sure ministers are presenting issues and policy statements to the House. One of those issues that we've been pushing for a few months now is the long-awaited reform to leasehold and commonhold. The Secretary of State confirmed in our Select Committee last month that will be laid before the House before Christmas. Can you guarantee, Prime Minister, we will receive that before the House rises on the Thursday the 18th?
I can't guarantee that, but I want to move it forward as quickly as possible. I know the strength of feeling and the reasons that we need to look at this. They're self-evident. So we'll come forward with proposals as quickly as we can.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Prime Minister, you're heading off as well, eventually to hopefully a bit of a Christmas break, but we understand you're flying off to Berlin today. I wondered if you could give us an update on the situation vis-à-vis Ukraine and what the UK is doing in that respect.
Well, thank you for that, because this is obviously a critical period for Ukraine, and not just for Ukraine, for Europe and for the United Kingdom. And European history is full of peace agreements that failed and sometimes led to even greater conflict. And that is why it's really important that we attend to this in detail. Putin has shown time and again that he will keep coming back for more if he sees the chance. We must never lose sight of that. And that's why I've argued consistently that any cessation of hostilities, we've gone on for nearly 4 years now, exacting a heavy price in Ukraine, both on the front line, civilians, infrastructure, energy, and, if I may say so, in Russia, where 5,000 Russian soldiers on average are being killed every week on the front line because of the ambitions of one man, Putin. Now, there's a text that may take us forward that is in play, which I've discussed extensively with a number of leaders. President Zelensky was in last Monday for a private discussion about that. We're meeting again in Berlin tonight with President Zelensky and others. There are a number of principles that to me are absolutely fundamental. First, decisions on the most sensitive issues, including territory, are for Ukraine to decide. So no issues about Ukraine without Ukraine. Secondly, strong security guarantees are vital. Peace agreements fail, in my view, predominantly because there aren't sufficiently robust security guarantees behind them, which is why the French President and I set up the Coalition of the Willing, which was to put in place guarantees from the Coalition of the Willing countries in accordance with and alongside the US playing a full part. And then the third principle is that elements that affect NATO, Europe and the EU must involve NATO, Europe and the EU and their institutions and members. And we must, whilst we strive for a just and lasting peace, and we do, and there's no country that wants that more than Ukraine, we must keep supporting Ukraine in the fight and keep the pressure on Putin, because only Russia stands in the way of peace, nobody else. And so that is the principal case that I have been making, will continue to make tonight. I hope we can make some further progress. We certainly had a good session in Monday in Downing Street last week, but the route to peace is not a straight road, but we will keep on trying to get to the right outcome, because as I say, history is littered with peace agreements in Europe, which people had faith in, but in the end fell apart and led to even worse conflict.
You talk about security guarantees. Would that be British personnel and British equipment on the ground in the region?
If necessary. I mean, what we did with the Coalition of the Willing was to draw up. We had a political process with the leaders. We had a military process with the military planners, and we said to them, we want military plans for the air, for the sea and for the ground, and for Ukraine's own capability. So we now have military plans in each of those areas. If necessary, that does involve ground deployment, but obviously at the moment the prior question is whether we can get to a just and lasting peace.
Mr. Dessy, did you want to?
I think
Okay, well, thank you.
Given the Prime Minister needs to go to Berlin, we don't know how
even the Chair of the Defence Committee would rather you went to Berlin. Well, can I thank the Prime Minister very much indeed for his time. The transcript of the session will be available on the website uncorrected in the next couple of days, with thanks to our colleagues at Hansard, thanks to our colleagues at both time. We hope, Prime Minister, that you do get some time for yourself and your family over the festive period.
Well, thank you, and can I wish all the members of the committee and their families a peaceful Christmas and New Year.
Thank you very much indeed. Order, order.